All right, so good evening, or maybe good morning or good afternoon, depending on the time of day that you're watching this recording. My name is Dustin Leasure, and you probably all remember me from the Train the Trainer session that we had with Dennis Rudd in Pittsburgh about a month ago. So as a matter of fact, I think it was back on March 8th. At any rate, during that Train the Trainer, I promised that I would put together some type of a quick video showing you guys some ideas on how to better or maybe more effectively present workflows as you're teaching SharePoint 2010. So I put together this little video to kind of run through a specialized SharePoint workflow that I've kind of created myself to show not only the power of workflows in the SharePoint 2010 environment, but also to maybe show how workflows don't have to be an independent object that we just turn on or turn off or trigger or don't trigger or attach to a library or a list and just be done with them. So this is going to incorporate a couple of different things as it relates to how a workflow works. So just to kind of set things up here before we get started, I've as you can see on my screen, I've got a kind of a little roadmap. By the way, I am using our labs in LOD for this, so you can feel comfortable that these will work as long as you're using those same LOD labs that are set up for SharePoint Foundations 2010 Level 1 and Level 2. So in this little diagram that I've created, you'll notice at the very top of my site collection, we have our WSS server. So if you've taught the class before, you should be comfortable with the URL, or at least the nomenclature or the structure that I've printed here. You'll also have to forgive me for the backwax in sites and HR. It's kind of difficult in Paint to select a text object after you've created it. So forgive me for those. But at any rate, I'm currently, or I'm going to be running this workflow in the HR site collection. And I just kind of want to point out that there's really three different types of workflows that we can create in SharePoint 2010. We can create, and you'll see this in the upper left-hand corner of my Paint picture, that there's what we call a site workflow, a reusable workflow, and a list, and I put in parentheses library workflow because I don't really think that just naming it a list workflow really gives credibility to what a list workflow can do, because it can also be attached to a library if we would like to do that. So what I'm going to show you an example of is a site workflow. Now, to kind of show the demarcation between these three different types of workflows and what they do and how they can be implemented in your SharePoint environment, a site workflow is going to sit at the level of, oddly enough, a site. So, for example, I might create a site workflow here on my HR site, and that particular workflow then can be used on any of the objects that live, or as I like to call them, containers, that live inside of that site. So I can create a site workflow that will work with a list or multiple lists. I can create a site workflow that will work with a library or multiple libraries. I could create a site workflow that really doesn't particularly have a list or a library that it works from, but it kind of works like maybe you might think of a macro inside of Excel as just kind of performing some action for us on our site. So that kind of describes what a site workflow might do. Now, a reusable workflow is a special type of list workflow that can be that still lives at the site level. However, however, it's going to be associated, or I'm going to associate that as an owner of a site. I'm going to associate that with a particular list, or maybe even a particular library. So I'm going to, as I see fit, just kind of attach that reusable workflow to either a list or a library. What makes it reusable is I can attach it to many containers. It's not just dedicated to one container. Now, what makes that different from a list workflow is that I'm only going to have one container that's actually going to use a list or a library workflow, and it could be a list or it could be a library. However, that particular type of workflow is a lot more granular. It's very specific to the container that we build it for. So that kind of breaks down the three different levels of workflows. Now, you also remember that in SharePoint 2010, Microsoft was gracious enough to leave our wonderful 3-step workflow available to us. I find it fairly clunky, and this is kind of one of the reasons why I put together this exercise in the Sharepoint Foundations 2010 Level 2 class, because I didn't really like the way that they presented workflows in the courseware. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a site workflow. That workflow is going to live at the HR site. Now, we're going to want the users to actually trigger that workflow by clicking on a hyperlink on the home page. It's going to open up and allow them to take a quick survey, which will then dump the survey results into a custom list that I create at the HR site. And then the end result is that there's going to be an end splash screen for that survey that will provide the user with a hyperlink that takes them right back to the home page of the site. So it kind of cleans up the process of creating a survey, and it gives you an alternative for how you can present the idea of creating surveys in SharePoint. So enough paint. I've already opened up the HR site, so it's available to me. I've also already opened up Sharepoint Designer from the HR site homepage, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the 3-step workflow is actually able to be created right from the browser window. However, if you have SharePoint Foundations, that's going to be the only template that's available to you, is that old clunky 3-step workflow. If you have SharePoint, Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, I think there's about 4 or 5 different templates for different types of workflows you can create through the browser. However, if one is really serious about creating workflows in a SharePoint environment, they're probably going to jump over to SharePoint Designer and use the wizard to build that workflow and then publish it from SharePoint Designer. So the first thing I need to do here is I need to create a custom list here in my site, my HR site, that's going to accept all the responses from the survey. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go up and do Site Actions. I'll do More Options. From the More Options page, I can select Custom List and give it some type of a meaningful name. So I'll call this Survey Responses, if I can type correctly here. Obviously giving this a URL-friendly name with no spaces. Later on, if I want to, through the settings of the list, I can go in and add that space so it's more user-friendly. But for now, I'll just go ahead and click Create. Now, once this is created, I need to jump over to the list settings, and I need to create a couple of specialized columns that are going to match up with the questions that are in my survey. So I'll just kind of scroll down here, and the first thing I'll do is take advantage of the built-in title column. I'll rename this Full Name. So we want the full name of the person or the employee that's going to be taking the survey. I'll then create 2 additional columns. The second column I'll create will be called the Suggestions column. Again, if I can type correctly here, that would make things easier. Click OK, and then I'll create one last column called Site Rating. Now, you'll notice that I'm not worrying too much about using my URL-friendly naming conventions here, because this is a column inside of a container, so it's not really going to affect my URL too much. So I've got my 3 columns. Now, you'll also notice that I created these columns just as single lines of text. I didn't add anything extra to them. They're just basically fields that are going to collect all of the information from the survey as the user takes the survey. So I'll just kind of use my breadcrumbs up here at the top, jump back, and see that I've got those 3 columns inside of my new custom list. So now that I have that custom list created, I'm going to jump over to SharePoint Designer here. In my navigation pane on the left, the 3rd object down is the Workflows object, so I click on that. And this is where, for the first time, you'll get a chance to see those 3 different types of workflows in SharePoint Designer. So there's my list workflow. Now, you'll remember that this list workflow gives us the ability to attach it to one container. So it gives me a list of the containers that I want to attach it to right off of the bat. However, with a reusable workflow, I'm not going to attach it to anything. This is going to be a workflow that I have the ability to later on through the browser go in and actually attach to a list or attach to a library. And then the site workflow doesn't have to be specific to any type of container. It can just perform some actions for me. So I'm going to start here with a site workflow. First asks for the name, so I'll call this my survey questionnaire. Again, boy, I can't type. 2 N's in there when I don't need them. Or maybe I do, who knows. I click OK, and it creates my new site workflow. Now, this does take a little bit of time. You have to give it a chance to spin up. It has to talk to the SharePoint server and pull in all the information that's needed to start our wizard here. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually create an action that's going to populate our list. Now, when we create this action, we have to be able to collect data from our users. So we're going to use what's called an initiation form parameter. So you'll see the initiation form parameter button here on the right-hand side of the ribbon once I open it up. And this is going to give me the ability to create some empty variables that the user can fill up by just simply answering my questions. So first thing I need to do is create my action. So I click on the action button in the ribbon. And from here, I want to create a list item. So each one of these list items is going to be a list item that is the result of the survey. Now, once I have added this action, it asks me what list I want to add these items to, and then what the output is going to be. Well, I really can't define the output just yet because I haven't really created the questions that I'm going to ask my users. So this initiation form parameters button gives me the ability to load up some empty variables when the workflow runs. So I'm going to click on this to create my 3 questions. So this isn't a very intuitive place to go to add questions for a survey, but just kind of follow me along here and I'll show you how you can capture information really quickly and easily. So I'm going to create my 3 fields, or my 3 initiation form parameters that match those fields in that custom list. So in the upper right, I'm going to click Add. It's going to say, what's my field name? Well, this is going to be the employee name field. Now, obviously, I'm just going to use a couple of fields here to make it easy, but you could create as many of these parameters as you would like and capture as much information as you would like. I'm also only going to ask that the user type into a single line of text. I click Next. There's not a default name of employees, so I'll keep that blank, and I'll click Finish. So you'll notice it's created this new employee name variable, show on form during the initiation of the workflow. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to click Add to add a second here, and this will be the list your suggestions for the site variable. Instead of a single line of text here, I'm going to go with multiple lines of text. I'll give a next here, and maybe I just want to make my number of lines of text here a 5. Not any default value there. Click Finish, and I need one last one here for my site rating. So this will be Rate This Site. Now you'll notice that the field name I'm actually naming as if it were a question, because that's how the user is going to see it. Now with this, I've got maybe 3 different ratings here. So I'm going to select a choice as a menu to choose from. Click Next, and then in this next box here, my choices, I just simply have to type them in. So I'm just going to type in something like maybe great, functional, or poor. Default value, well, I think my site is great, so I'm going to make that great, and I'm going to give this to the user as a drop-down, but notice I also have the option to select radio buttons here, so I'll just say drop-down menu, and then I click Finish. So these are basically the 3 questions that will pop up when the workflow runs. Now, once I've created this, I can click OK. Now I can go back to my action and say, what list do I want to populate, and what variables am I going to add to it? So if I click on this list, now one thing that you may need to do, if I click my drop down here, I just created that custom list and I called it Survey Questionnaire. Now I've already opened up this particular site and had already loaded up Sharepoint Designer. But remember, actually, I created the list called Site Responses or Survey Responses. So notice right there's my custom list. You may find that you need to refresh SharePoint Designer in the middle of class. A couple of times I've done it. I go back over to SharePoint Designer. That list isn't there because it hasn't updated that new custom list in Designer yet. So at any rate, it's already here for me, so I'm going to select that. Now, when I select the list I want to populate, it then tells me or asks me what field do I want to fill out and what's the value for it. So if I click on, or better yet, double-click full name. Remember, I created 3 fields: full name, suggestions, and site rating. So I want to say in the full name field in the list, set it to the value that's equal to that initiation form parameter that I set. To do that, in this to this value field, I click the FX button on the right. The data source, when you click the drop-down, notice there's workflow, variables, and parameters right there at the top. So those initiation form parameters are where I'm going to find those 3 questions. I select that, and then in the drop-down, there's those 3 questions that I've created. So this is the employee name field, and I want to populate that field as a string. I click OK a second time, and that's the first field. Now I just simply have to add 2 more. So I click Add, set the next field, which is suggestions. So suggestions to the value of the form parameter that was equal to the suggestions question. List your suggestions for the site. Click OK. You can probably see a small pattern here. I do the third one. I set the field that is the site rating equal to a value of the form parameter field that is the rate this site. And I might have to scroll down a little bit to find that. Where is that guy at? Oh, my data source. I have to select that first. So I have to tell it my variable and parameter, and then rate this site. So I click OK. I click OK a second time. And this action is saying now, populate the list called survey responses, these 3 fields with these 3 parameters. I click OK. Now, once I've set this, I also would like to create an action that sends an email to someone that says, someone's taken a survey, go out and check their response. And I'd like to put their rating of the site in the subject of the email. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click underneath that first action, and I'll add a second action, which will be send an email. Send an email to these users. I click the these users link, and I'm just going to use my user account, user01 at ourglobalcompany.com. Now in the subject line, I'd like to dump into the subject the rating that the user gave us. So again, I go back over to that FX button, I click on it, my data source is still my variables and parameters, and I dump in there, rate this site. Click OK. Now, in the body of my email, I might want this to say the employee named, comma space, and I can do the add or change lookup to dump from my variables the employee name field into the body of the email, and then rated this site as, and then a space, and maybe I'll dump in the rating from the variable as well. Who knows? And you can obviously set this up however you would like the email to read. Please go check the site. Who knows? Be happy SharePoint gnome. Which is always a fun way to put a name in an automated email from SharePoint. But at any rate, you click OK here, and it creates that email. So I essentially have both of the actions set up for my workflow. I'm going to have it populate the list based on the variables and how the user fills out those fields. Then I'm going to take some of those responses, put them into an email, and send them out to user01. So once I've done that, I can go ahead and save my workflow. I can also publish this, but before I publish this, I'm going to go over to my workflow settings, and I just kind of want to look at this real quick. When you click on workflow settings, you'll notice there's a couple of additional options that I can select here. One of the things I'm going to point out with start options is remember, this is considered a site workflow. So I don't have the option to say when a new item is added, because it's not going to be actually triggered by someone uploading a document or creating a list item. So I'm fine with that. I can do the Edit Workflow button to jump back over to my workflow. One thing I forgot to do here was to check for errors, which is a nice way to check to see if the logic matches what SharePoint Designer wants it to match in the way we build it. And it looks like I have no errors here. So I click OK. And now I publish this. This is going to push it out to my SharePoint site. It makes it immediately available so that I can start doing with it what I would like to do with it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to just test this workflow first, just to make sure that the form pops up. And in doing that, I'm going to show you a couple of things that maybe aren't going to be acceptable to the end user, or maybe we just kind of want to clean up so it's a little bit of an easier process. So if I switch over to my site here, again, this is my human resources site. To find those site workflows, they're kind of hidden. You have to go back to the more options, or actually it's the view all site content page. And in the upper portion here, I've got this little button that says what site workflows. So again, this isn't probably one of the best places to put that button, but we'll take care of that here in a second. So I click on it. There's my survey questionnaire workflow. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on it to trigger it so you can see the form and how the form ended up working out after I built it. I'll answer the workflow. We'll go back and check that list, and maybe we'll also look in our email to see if we received that email. So Bill Gates is going to be the first person to take this. And so hopefully Bill thinks we're a great SharePoint admin, rate the site as great. Now we have to click Start here in order to start the workflow. And we'll just kind of let it run. Notice it takes us back to this kind of ugly page here. So I don't want the user to have to go to this page, click on the workflow. And when they're done, I don't want them to end up here. So there's two things we're going to add to this. We're going to add this particular page as a clickable link on our home page. And then we'll also have a splash screen for the end result here. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click the survey questionnaire one more time. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because your URL is the way that the user can get to this survey without actually launching the, without actually clicking to launch the workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this guy here. I'm going to maybe throw him down into just a regular old basic notepad document. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to point some things out about the URL here in a second. But for now, I've got it copied and it's down here on Notepad, so it's safe. Now, I want to make sure that my list is being populated appropriately. So I go back over to my home page. There's my survey responses list. And sure enough, good old Bill Gates has given us a nice suggestion with a great rating. So once I know that the mechanics of the workflow work, now I can kind of smooth the edges over a little bit to make this a little bit easier to get to. So the first thing I'm going to do, and this should be fairly simple, I'm just going to go back to the home page here for human resources. And instead of this generic welcome to your site, I'd like to change this to read, take a site survey. So from my page tab at the top, I can edit my page. It gives me the ability to get rid of this text here. Don't want that text. And if I go over to my Insert tab, I can say I want to insert a hyperlink. Now this hyperlink is the text to display will be click here to take a site survey. And then as I make sure that survey is spelled correctly, I'm also then going to paste that home page for my survey or for my workflow right there in the address field. So I click OK, and this is a quick little easy way to create a hyperlink. Now I might want to make it a little bit bigger and make it stand out or something, who knows. You can kind of make up your own mind on how you want this to stand out nicely. And I got a space in there. Now, if I want to make any changes to this, I can always just simply select it. Notice it brings up the Link Tools Format tab. And looks like I can remove the link. Maybe I can do a couple things to it. So for now, I'm not going to worry too much about that extra E there. That's not too big of a deal. I'm going to go over to my page, and I'll save and close this page. So from here, let's take this survey a second time. So I click on the link. Notice it takes me right to that survey. Now, this time, our good friend Paul Allen is going to take our survey. None I'm too busy. And he thinks it's great as well. So I click start. Again, now I've got my 2 results here. It shows me those. I'm on this kind of ugly end result page of the workflow. Now if I go back to my home tab and go down to my list, I see that my list has now collected both of those. However, kind of the icing on the cake, as I like to think of it with this particular workflow, is to give a nice splash screen at the end for the user so that when they're done, they've got a hyperlink right to the home page. Now, this is where we have to go back to that URL. Now, I'm going to bring back my notepad here and maximize this. One thing that you have to kind of pay attention to the end of the URL for that workflow is notice it ends up with this template ID. So this kind of determines what form is going to pop up. A good for the form that's going to pop up when we click on it. But more importantly is this source attribute here. You'll notice that this actually gives the page to the workflow for when you're done with the workflow. So source equals is kind of where you end up after you take that or after that workflow is done. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remember that this URL is here. I'm going to minimize, and I'm just going to simply create a new page. So I'm going to do site actions, more options here. I'm just going to create an empty blank page. Now, this is just going to be a page. I'll call it thank you. Click create. And I'm just going to put in here, thank you for taking this survey. Now, I'm also going to create a little hyperlink here. So I'll insert another link. I'll call this home, and I'll just simply make it a link right back to the home page of the HR site. So gives the users a little bit of navigation back to the home page. So now that I've created this simple page, I'm going to save it and close it. Now, once you save this page, notice home is a link. I can test that. Sure enough, it takes me right back to the home page. But more importantly, notice the URL of where this page lives. That's what we're going to put at the end of the URL for the opening hyperlink. So I copy this guy. I go back down to my notepad. And after the equals sign after source, you want to leave source equals. I'm going to paste that right in there. So this just shows where the workflow should end up. So now I've got a good URL. And I'm just going to do a quick Control A here, make sure it's entirely copied or highlighted, and then I'll copy it. I'm just going to go back here to my home page, and I just have to replace the link here that I created with the appropriate link. So I'm going to edit my page again. And maybe a quick, easy way would be just to select it, and maybe I'll just recreate it since I had an extra E in there. So I want to insert a hyperlink. Click here to take a site survey. Maybe capitalize both S's here to be consistent, who knows. Then I'm just going to paste that new altered URL, and kind of the nice thing here is it pastes and shows us the right end, so you can see that that thank you page is going to be at the end for the source of the URL. So I click OK. Maybe I want to do a little bit of formatting here again, make it a little bit bigger or whatever, who knows. I give it an underline so it looks like it's a hyperlink. So there we go. This should be the completed link to the site workflow with the splash page at the end and the link back to the home page. So to just kind of wrap this up, I'll give you one last quick example here. I click on it, it takes me right to the page where I want to go. And this time Steve Jobs is going to fill it out. And he gives me a great rating as well. I click start, and this is where I should see that it takes me to my thank you page. I can then just simply click home, and it takes me right back to the very beginning. So hopefully this has given you a good example of not only what a site workflow can do, but some other ways that you can incorporate different pages in your site, and really inspecting the URL of how to get back and forth between different areas within SharePoint. So with that, thank you. If anybody has any questions, you all should probably know my email address or be able to find me. However, I'll just, for one last final sign off, go ahead and put that right here inside of that Paint document that I started with. And I hope that everybody has a wonderful teaching day and a wonderful teaching career with New Horizons. So have a great evening. Take care.